everybody, and welcome. You are at the absolutely most important event in this whole show. And if you're in this room right now, you already know that. I'm Sandy Boakley. I'm the president of the board of directors of SME this year. Excited to be here, and I made that, I'm not sure if it was a mistake or what, I told Ed Morris that I'm an engineer, and next thing you know, he's drafted me to pick which standard I want to rate. So anyway, so good afternoon and welcome to the Additive Manufacturing Standardization Forum. SME's additive manufacturing community has supported the technology and application development for many years. Excuse me. Recognizing the need for standards, SME approached ASTM in 2008. That effort became the F42 committee. We are very honored to be hosting this forum today, supporting the work of the more than 200 volunteers in the AMSC. Through SME's continuing collaboration with industry, researchers, and practitioners, we hope to facilitate this growth. Whether using additive manufacturing in aerospace, automotive, medical, or other industries, a common knowledge of technology helps everyone in manufacturing. So thank you for being here today and for being a part of this effort. Now please help me welcome Ed Morris, the Director and Vice President of America Makes.
Well, thank you, Sandy, and just a minor update. I am now the Vice President and Chief Curmudgeon for America Makes, and my 4.5-year colleague, Rob, the brain goes overloaded some of these things. Rob Gorman, get the name correctly, has taken over as the Executive Director of America Makes, the National Additive Manufacturing Innovation Institute. Some quick background. We met in January of last year to convene and start the conversation about how to accelerate standards and specifications for additive manufacturing. That was prompted by a conversation with Vice Admiral Phil Cullum, the head of piece of naval operations, where he just proclaimed the only organization that can pull this off to get the standards accelerated in additive manufacturing is probably America Makes, and we took that challenge on. I recognized quickly that that is the most significant barrier, roadblock, to accelerating the additive manufacturing technology in the United States and worldwide for that matter. And so something had to be done to try to accelerate the process. The first major step then, which was the topic of this meeting in January of last year, was convening with the standards developing organizations and talking about the process and how to do that, and the concept of having a roadmap for the gaps of standards. That very fortuitously resulted in us meeting the leadership from the American National Standards Institute, ANSI, Jim McCabe, Senior Director for Standards Facilitization, and Fran Schroeder, the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for ANSI. I don't know about all of you, but in my 40-plus years in the industry, I always thought ANSI was a standards developing organization, SDO. Because I saw, NCY 14.5 and several other documents, and they were quick to, no, we don't write and issue standards. We are the accrediting, approving agency established by Congress over 100 years ago for standards in the United States, that represent the United States in ISO and so forth. And Jim can correct me if I got anything wrong. And talk about a really fortuitous relationship. I like working with smart people that get things done. It's especially bonus for smart people get things done, and they're great to work with. And ANSI, and particularly Jim McCabe, has just been absolutely fantastic to work with. So what we've accomplished as a team with over 250 subject matter experts across the United States is we set the deadline a year ago, and by February 28th of this year, airplane on the runway, we released a roadmap for standardization of additive manufacturing for the United States. Of course, it's useful worldwide. Well, that's really nice. And you'll hear some of the conversations about what's in the roadmap, et cetera, et cetera. But one of my favorite little jabby quotes is, you know, if you don't plan to travel the roadmap, don't bother making one. You're just wasting your time. So having made the roadmap, today is a pivotal step to travel the roadmap. So you'll hear a couple of panel presentations, and then there'll be opportunity to actually sign up to start writing the documents to get them out and get them released. So with that, Jim McCabe, my new best friend, wow, does he know how to get things done?
Thanks very much. Seeing I've gotten all this praise, if I can get the PowerPoints to work, we'll be all set here. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks Ed and for the nice words of introduction. I'm going to talk just real briefly. This is going to be a very high level overview of the work we've done to produce this over the last year. And as Ed said, everybody will have an opportunity at the end of this to talk in more detail with the representatives of the standards developing organizations who we're delighted who can be here with us. So just a little bit of sort of the backdrop again. Both NIST, ASTM came to ANSI about January of last year, December, I guess, of the year before that, talking about this need to develop some sort of coherent standardization roadmap, if you will, for additive. And so this partnership was born. Everybody knows America Makes, obviously the first of the 14 Manufacturing USA Institutes, leader in innovation and research on additive. For those who don't know ANSI, we have been around since 1918, so coming up on 100 years next year. We are a public-private partnership, 501c3 membership organization. We serve as the sort of administrator and coordinating body of the private sector voluntary standardization system in the United States. We have public sector support, but it's private sector led. We're the sole U.S. representative body to the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, in Geneva, as well as its sister organization, the International Electrotechnical Commission, that does standards in that space. And ANSI has done a number of these sorts of facilitations in other areas like energy efficiency in the built environment, electric vehicles. Whenever there's sort of a new area of technology or global national priorities where the community of stakeholders, standards developing organizations, and industry come together and say, we really need to kind of get together and talk to each other, that's where we're able to I think, add some value. So some of the drivers, again, why we're doing this. Well, it was pointed out early on in the process that there are a number of SDOs, and forgive me, the standards developing organizations, I have a habit of throwing around acronyms, who are involved in some way, shape, or form in writing standards for additive manufacturing. And so America Makes had actually also developed a standard strategy which said we really need to make sure there's no conflict, no overlap, no duplication of effort, so we can have a coherent suite of standards so that if I'm an industry person, I can just go up and say, that's the standard that I need and not be confused. And we'll talk a little bit more of that as we go through this. And really up until we established this partnership, there wasn't sort of a mechanism, if you will, in place to kind of assure that that coordination was going on. I mentioned NIST, also the Department of Defense. Those two organizations provided major funding to support ANSI's involvement in this, so thanks to them. And FAA was also a leader early on in trying to get the conversation going. So the purpose, plain and simple, of the Additive Manufacturing Standardization Collaborative was to coordinate and accelerate the development of industry-wide AM standards and specs consistent with stakeholder needs. So it's really about what you guys want. Let me get rid of this. And thereby to facilitate the growth of the AM industry. Part of ANSI's mission is to facilitate the global competitiveness of U.S. business and promote the U.S. quality of life. So it's tied in really nicely with our mission. As Ed pointed out, AMSC is not about writing standards. That's for the SDOs. The hope is that this roadmap that we've produced will now, and the subsequent dialogues that we're having, we had some just this morning with the SDOs, will get us to this point of having more coordinated activity among the SDOs. So anybody can participate in this as long as you do some business in the United States. This is America Makes, the American National Standards Institute. We're not necessarily coordinating internationally, though we certainly point to a lot of standards developing organizations who are international in their scope of activity. The members who came to the table, and I always like to say the roadmap is as good as those experts from industry who come to help write it. So we had a lot of participation from the aerospace, defense, and medical sectors. And, we had powder manufacturers, we had printer makers, we had the user stakeholder community, research organizations, both from academia and government, over 260 people from 150 different organizations. So it was a pretty broad swath of individuals who got together to write this document. And we worked them hard, too. We had bi-weekly conference calls of 60 to 90 minutes where we talked about identifying what the gaps are and then actually recruiting volunteers to write this 200-page document, which is available on our website. And basically what the roadmap is, it identifies any and all published standards that are currently in development, and then it includes some recommendations where there is a perceived need for additional standardization. In some cases, it might be just sort of noting that there's already work in progress to develop a particular standard. There's a companion document, which is more or less just a spreadsheet of standards, but these are standards that relate in some way, shape, or form to the issues that are raised in the roadmap. And again, you can get these documents off of the ANSI website. So this is sort of a table of contents, but this is also the working group structure we had. We had 5 primary working groups, kind of looking at the life cycle of producing an AM process, from conceptualization to printing to the post-processing aspects that take place after that, and then qualification and certification. And then some of the testing that follows on after that, and maintenance. And I'll talk a little bit more about these and some of the specifics of what we ventured into. But these are the sort of the main categories that the roadmap covers. So how we did this. So in each section, what you'll find in the document is there's sort of a description of the issue, again, citing what existing standards may or may not exist. In a lot of cases, there's nothing specific. We defined a gap as meaning there is no existing published standard, right? So there's nothing that industry can immediately look to say, hey, this gives me the guidance that I need. So even if something was in development, even if it was maybe out for ballot, it's still technically a draft, and we consider it still a gap. That was the sort of differentiation point. Once it's published and it's available, then you close the gap, and you can move on and say, on to the next project. All of the gaps, and there are 89 of them, have a recommendation associated with that. In many cases, in addition to there should be a standard addressing this subject, there's also identification of research and development needs associated with that. And I think in 58 cases of those 89, we have R&D associated with it, and sort of underscoring the fact that this is a new area of technology and there's a lot to still be kind of figured out. We also assigned a priority level to each of these, high, medium, and low. High priority areas were ones that, the criteria, I guess I should say, that we used to determine the priority. We looked at things like the criticality in terms of safety or quality, how achievable was it to write a standard, the investment of resources required, was it a new project, was it something that was going to have a lot of R&D in front of it, and then what's going to be the market impact or effect. So we sort of used those four criteria and had a scoring table to decide what we thought was high priority, medium, and low priority. And that was actually an interesting discussion in its own right, to then sort of look to the SDOs and map that against what they are looking at in terms of what's currently on their work programs. The last sort of key piece we did was to identify an organization or organizations that potentially could address the recommendations. Again, in a lot of cases, there's work already in progress. Maybe ASTM F42 already has a standard on powder bed fusion, and so that is like continue, finish that good work, and there you go. But there also could be other SDOs, and this is where it gets a little tricky and the conversation gets interesting, that also maybe have started work or have an interest. So that's, again, where the whole area of coordination comes into play. And we're going to hear more from the individual SDOs as they present and talk about their work programs. But just real quickly, here's the gaps breakdown. As I mentioned, 89 overall, 19 high priority, 51 medium, 19 low. In terms of high, ideally, we said that should mean a standard should be out available on the street in 2 years. Medium was like 2 to 5, and long-term or low priority was 5 or more years. Most of the interest, the areas highlighted in red here, are in the design, process control, and qualification and certification, both overall in terms of gaps and in terms of the ones that were deemed high priority. Not sure what that signifies, but it's just an interesting observation in terms of how the data broke out. I'm not going to really have time to sort of go into these, but it's just that this in the next slide is sort of a list of the high priority gaps, sort of indicative of what I was just talking about on the last slide. You'll see there's a lot of gaps that were deemed high priority in the area of design, contents of a technical data package, dimensioning and tolerance requirements, data definitions, precursor materials, looking at feedstock sampling, and then moving over to process control, you know, all those sort of quality assurance type things you need to do while you're actually printing the part. Some overlap in some cases in terms of recycle, reuse of materials and feedstock sampling, but a lot of times what you would find was we kept both gaps in because they were sort of coming at it from a different angle, a different perspective in the process. And then things like, you know, environmental conditions, the effects that has on feedstock materials, health and safety of the workers, of course. And then sort of finishing out just the list of high priority gaps. And there's a handy table at the beginning of the document that kind of just lists the gap, the recommendation, the organization identified to do it, and the priority level. So even if it's 200 pages, but I think that's only about 20-25. We have some sectoral things in there, like cleanliness of medical AM parts, and I think later on here there's making sure that there are test methods to ensure, not only from the design side, but that a part is able to be cleaned, you know, for those medical device uses. Harmonization of terminology seemed to be a big issue. A lot on this whole area of qualification and certification of parts, of people, of vendors, and so on. Non-destructive testing and evaluation, terminology and the ability to identify flaws detectable by NDE methods, and so on. So this last set of slides, and I'll just flip through these quickly because I want to give most of the time to the SDOs to talk, but this is, again, sort of just what you'll find in each chapter. So these are the main headings of issues that are found in the design chapter. And again, we find that there are, you know, in terms of specific sector applications, the area of print and electronics, there's one standards developing organization, IPC, that's really their purview area. Medical and so on, assemblies, when you have parts that, an AM part that has moving parts. Precursor materials, you know, looking at things like storage, handling, and transportation, the whole area of characterization and all sort of the subcomponents of that in terms of how materials flow and chemical composition, morphology, and so on, the need for process-specific metal powder specs. So one of the things we found, sort of a lot of expertise on metals and metal powders at the table. In the next iteration of the document, we want to try and do more on some of the other materials, polymers and so forth, that we just felt we had some, and the document reflects that, but we would like to get more OEMs in particular involved at the table so we can enhance that section of the document. Process control, again, I've talked a little bit about this. These are some of the different headings. We even get into areas such as cybersecurity, which is obviously a horizontal area, and it shows up a couple times in the roadmap in terms of being an area of concern. And of course, post-processing, you know, all the different treatments that a part goes through after it's been printed on its way to being qualified. Also a whole working group looking at finished material properties and the importance of material properties and things like design allowables. Again, some sectoral sort of derivations here of biocompatibility and cleanliness of medical devices. The qualification and certification is laid out just a little bit different than the other chapters, because what we said was sort of, we wanted the other working groups to look at that, Q and C, but if they didn't, it was kind of a check on them. So we started it out, the introduction, as kind of an overview of several documents that you see listed here that talk about aspects of qualification and certification. And then the chapter concludes with specific narratives about aerospace, defense, and medical, and what each of those particular sectors looks at in terms of Q and C. Again, non-destructive evaluation, there was a working group just dedicated to that specific topic. And last but certainly not least, maintenance. How are both AM printers and parts, whether if they're parts that are printed using AM or using AM printed parts to repair machines, how does that all play out? What standards are needed related to that? And see cybersecurity, again, rearing its head here in this area. So the last, just to talk a little bit briefly about next steps, as Ed said, we're traveling the roadmap. We're here to kind of get the word out. The last hour of today is about, those of you who have an interest who may not have been involved before, to talk to some of the SDO representatives who are here about how you can get involved. Happy to come and talk to me as well about getting involved in the AMSC as a coordination effort. We're continuing to track SDO actions on, who's picking up on the gaps in the recommendations. Again, some work's already in progress. We had a meeting this morning. We had a meeting at the end of March. We're having another meeting in July, just to kind of keep the momentum going so that we're all sort of working towards this goal. And I have to say, in terms of other road mapping efforts that I've been involved with at ANSI, this one is, America Makes as a partner, showing a lot of great leadership here in terms of sort of bringing that message home that we really need to have a coordinated effort so that folks are in the clear in terms of, what standards they need to rely on. We're looking kind of to kick in phase 2 in the September timeframe. So we'll be looking at bringing in, as I said, other subject matter experts in other areas, but also other industries. Sort of the tail end, we got a little bit of interest from like the oil and gas sector, automotive. We pretty much didn't have very little representation from that sector. So that is another way of enhancing the value of the document. And then to kind of go back and overlook any gaps that we might have overlooked or not covered in the first iteration. So that's all I've got. I'm not sure where I'm at time, but happy to take any questions or kick it over to the Jim and the next panel.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pat Piccarello, and I'm ASTM's Director of Developmental Operations. I'm going to talk a little bit about ASTM, F42 specifically, our additive sector in general, and how that dovetails into the AMSC that you just learned a little about. If you were here earlier, my colleague Mohsen Sethi gave a very similar presentation. My perspective is non-tech. Mohsen is a science guy, a PhD, AM guy. I'm a liberal arts guy, so no tech for me. Before I get started into this, any of you here very early this morning to listen to the gentleman in the big room? So he opened up very caffeinated at the time, and which is very motivating. But he talked about a lot about bridges, primarily this bridge between yesterday and tomorrow, and how we're right on the crux of all of these great things that are going to happen. And I don't disagree with that. Standards are a bridge. And in this particular area, we're talking about the bridge from research to market, right? You want to commercialize these technologies, want to make them as broadly relevant as we can. More people use them, everybody's happy, markets expand. So how do you get from the R&D part of this to the market part? One way to do that is to develop consensus standards that bring consistency and repeatability and reproducibility and all that stuff that people who use these things like and can rely upon when they're making decisions. So this is our version of what Jim laid out in terms of focus areas for the AMSC. Gaps are identified, as you can see. And ASTM, due uniquely to the breadth of the organization, is relevant one way or the other, as I say here in whole or in part, to 82 of the 89 gaps, 17 of the 19 identified as high priority. Our resource allocation internally is focused there. And this little bullet at the bottom is important for you. ASTM has an agreement with ISO and its TC 261. So any work that we undertake to fill gaps, or any work in general for that matter, is offered to ISO and that TC for development of a joint ISO-ASTM standard at the end of the day. This is one attempt that we've made to deal with this issue of duplication. Absolutely, if without an agreement, there would have been ISO standards and there would be ASTM standards and other standards. Absolutely. Ideally, they are in some way connected to each other and complementary. Not always the case. In this particular area, however, the documents that come out of these processes between us and ISO, one document around the world used, ideally. So the AM footprint for ASTM, 19 committees, 1,000 plus standards, 2,000 technical experts. F42 among that population is the oldest and the largest, most globally relevant, both in terms of membership, which we'll see in a second, and also under the collaboration area, the PSDO and TC 261, and by extension, CEN, TC 438. CEN is the Center for European Normalization. It's a regional body dealing with members of the European Union, headquartered in Brussels. And CEN takes ISO standards and through an agreement called the Vienna Agreement can make them European norms. And the great thing about an EN, ISO ASTM standard, or EN in general, is that it becomes mandatory throughout the EU. And if there is something that pre-exists this particular document, it needs to go away. It's withdrawn and it's replaced by the EN. So in terms of, again, the one document everywhere, no duplication, this is a way to facilitate and enable that. And some other related news articles that are on the F42 page, if you're interested and have some time to kill. This is the latest version of sort of an infographic of the sector that we have. F42 is at the top of the list. That's the hub of the wheel. And then you see underneath this a collection of committees that are all relevant in one way or another to additive. You got the feedstock grouping, the methodology grouping, and then the specific applications. Not only will these areas be working in new standardization, but as I said to you before, there are well over 2,000 documents that live inside of these committees. That are all of these developed with AM in mind? No. I would venture to guess that almost none of them were developed with AM in mind. Are they relevant to AM? Absolutely they are. So part of our charge is to look at this, work with the membership, and determine of what the existing population here is. What do we need to do to it to make it AM relevant to satisfy needs? Can it work on its own? Does it need to change? Do we need something brand new? What does it reference? What other organizations do we need to speak to? Okay, so the breadth of the relevance in this sector is significant, touching on aerospace, automotive, medical, and also a little bit of shipping and marine at the bottom. So the fact sheet, this should say 600 plus, not 500 plus, typo. F42 was organized back in '09. The global representation you see, and this little diagram in the middle, the subcommittees, map, not coincidentally, to the AMSC subject areas, although these predate it, methods, design, materials, process, EHS terminology. A bit of the stakeholder representation, everything from government to academia to industry to trade, and again, all over the world. As we've said, certainly this is a globally relevant industry. And if you ignore Europe, if you ignore the Pacific Rim, I think you do so at your peril. And fortunately, this is a mechanism here inside of AMSC that recognizes and encourages this kind of collaboration. And there are individual partnerships that ASTM has with other organizations. I talked to you briefly about the PSDO. We also have an MOU with America Makes, which is in the process of being updated. And there is a partnership agreement that we have with 3MF, which is a consortium led by Microsoft in the area of design and data format. ASTM has a standard on AMF, additive manufacturing file format. 3MF is a more homogenized version of AMF developed in a consortium model versus the full consensus SDO model. Some of the reasons why this PSDO agreement is a good thing. Primarily, it's about facilitating exchange of goods and services. Again, that research to market theme sort of is pervasive throughout everything that we do here. We want the standards to be globally relevant, and we want them to be developed in a cooperative way. This agreement is an enabler of joint standards. So not everything that comes out of F42 is an ISO ASTM standard. Not everything that comes out of TC261 is an ISO ASTM standard. If there is a desire among the stakeholder population in both committees to work together, this agreement enables that. It aligns process, it tells us how to go about doing it, but it doesn't mandate it. So you will see, you do see now, ASTM standards, ISO ASTM standards, and ISO standards inside of this model. All referencing each other, none duplicative. So what are the guiding principles under which we live inside of that PSDO and in general? Yeah, we want one set of standards. Okay, this is like the big pie in the sky pipe dream for everybody working in the standards world. It is hard to achieve. It truly is, because not only are there multiple ways to achieve international standardization, there are multiple organizations that develop international standards. Every one of the SDOs that are going to come up and talk to you in their own world, in their own space, are developing internationally relevant standards. There is no hierarchy in our mind. It's just another way to get to the end that's accomplished. We want the common roadmap. So we want everybody to be working towards the same objective in the same way. We want to build upon existing when we can, modify existing when necessary, and it really should be joint to the extent that it can. This is a busy slide, but it talks about the structure really from top down, general to category to specialized. And to me, the most important word on this slide is this et cetera inside of each of these boxes. This is meant to be an example. It is not inclusive. So if there is a need that is out there that is not on this list, that doesn't mean that we are not doing it or cannot do it. It simply means that there wasn't enough room on the slide. So these are illustrative, okay? It's not meant to confine or put parameters on what it is that we're doing. These come down from the top, they flow up from the bottom. Standardization in new areas we see typically is a need-based concept, at least until you grow some roots and you get things moving. And then you can sit back and decide what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. But when you're starting out an activity from scratch and you want to keep stakeholders motivated and incentivized, you better produce, because if you don't produce, you're done. This is the more user-friendly, to my mind, anyway, my liberal arts mind, version of that other slide. Everything in the middle is what we're trying to foster. We want that enabling of certification and EHS compliance. And we do it through these different process areas, everything from equipment to app-specific to parts to feedstock to general. Quickly, some of the work product of the different subcommittees and parenthetically their size. You see combinations of ASTM and ISO ASTMs here. Design, materials and processes. There is this unique naming convention you see in the under development area. This is to be more consistent with how ISO's naming convention is. This is an experiment. This is not how ASTM does what it does. If you're familiar with an ASTM title, it's a standard test method for it. It's not this. But this is something that we're trying out to see if it will work and make people happier. More materials and processes. Challenges. You'll see lots of STOs here. More to come. High risk of dupe, inconsistency or contradiction, heaven forbid, conflicting standards and their ambiguity that they produce, and we need the coordination and collaboration. Our AM team is 3 deep. Mohsen brings the technical expertise. I bring the ASTM standards development expertise, and Christine brings business development expertise to the team. Thank you very much.
So really quickly, I'm actually not the chair of Y14. I would get in big trouble. I know it says that, but that's not who I am. Who are you? Well, yeah, who am I? Fred, who's the chair of Y14? Bill Cava is the chair of Y14, and he is not here. But we did see him last week. Fred Constantino back there is the ASME staff guru for Y14. So Y14 has anybody made a drawing or looked at a drawing or used a drawing in here? Oh, come on, all of you people have, right? Okay, come on, give it to me. All right, so this is, the Y14 series is product definition for anything you've ever built. And if you've seen it on a drawing, you've probably seen ASME Y14-5. And that's the primary one where it's profile tolerances, true position tolerances, things like that. So I've got a quick overview of what Y14 does here related to additive manufacturing specifically. I'm actually the chair of Y1446, which is product definition for additive manufacturing. So that's who I. Yeah. And we've been running along the roadmap, even though we didn't know we were running along the roadmap, creating content for additive manufacturing product definition. So in addition to Y14-5, which you would probably use in your drawings, there are a number of model-only specifications that ASME is developing now. And model-only is model-based definition. This is where we are not using the drawing, or in ASME language, we call it the drawing graphics sheet. We're not using 2D representations, we're using 3D models only. So, again, how many people 3D print with a 2D drawing? Okay, good. That's a good thing. Maybe one person. Well, we'll have to talk to you. But typically, you really are only using the models. So we're talking about moving those annotations into the 3D space and making them semantic or digitally associative, meaning that they're machine readable rather than just having, human readable annotations on 2D drawing. So 46 is my additive manufacturing for product definition. I have more detail if we have time, and I can show you some good work we've been doing there. The next one is model organization schema practices, and that is a subset of Y1441. And I'm going to get in trouble on these slides if any of our 14 people were here, but I didn't mention Y1441 either, and that is digital practices, product definition, digital practices. So that's typically what we think of when we think about model-based definition and 3D annotations. But this is a subset of that. And this one is also expected for release this year. I'm a member of that committee. We have taken the MIL Standard 31000 schema, which is basically the organization for models, and included that in the ASME offerings as well. So, and I can tell you more detail on that. I just didn't prepare any slides for that one as well. Then there's B89, which is the X-ray CT performance evaluation standard. And then 4 new initiatives that ASME is working on, and that's B46, and it's a team looking at surface finish for additive manufacturing. We've got some liaisons between our teams on that. 1448 is brand new, literally started last week. And it's universal direction and load indicators. One of the things you might use that for is build direction. Like stick, an arrow on your part and say, I want my build direction like this, or my gravity vector needs to be in a certain way because you've done some analysis surrounding that particular part. So we want to give you a way to define that in your product. So that one's a new thought. VNV 50, so verification of computational modeling for advanced manufacturing. Again, that thought of VNV, which nobody ever knows which is verify and which is validate and what that means. And then the next one is a new committee overall that would be parallel to Y14-5 on model-based enterprise. And this definitely comes out of the idea that we want to define all our products in 3D space rather than having to go to a drawing. I have some detail in this package. If we're sharing a PDF of these charts, which we can do, you can see the detail here. I'm not going to try to read all these, but they're there for you if you need them. And then I'll just give a few quick pictures on what we have tackled for product definition for AM. We did have a charter that was approved in January of 2016. We started this effort in May of 2015, so we've been at it about 2 years. And we specifically wanted to expand, enhance, and extend Y14.5 practices that were already developed in place, use those, but then provide some use cases specific to additive manufacturing so that we kind of dig around in the gaps and find what worked. So we are definitely adopting existing practices, the ASTM work. Pat, we have several committee members that are on ASTM. We've done the very best we can trying to liaise and make sure we're not duplicating any work. We do a lot of reference to ASTM terms and definitions and terminology, and definitely reusing GD&T methods. When this releases, this is a bit new for it's not new for ASME, they've done this before, but it's going to release a little bit differently than some of the other documents, and that is because AM is in this rapid development cycle. And so we are not releasing it today as a consensus standard of ASME, and it's not going to be an ANSI standard today. But that goes, it's intended to become that in the future after we have a trial use standard. So we'll release it soon. And then it'll be basically a very open public comment period in that trial use. So we'll get feedback and then do a rapid release cycle after that. So this is just how we've done the work to date, some brainstorming, obviously, terms and definitions, big deal. We did round 1, round 2, final comment adjudication, which was really round 3. So we're actually very close to getting that released. So quickly on the content, here's a list. Obviously, we have some new terms and definitions. We have taken the concept out of Y1441 about supplemental geometry. Anybody know supplemental geometry? Are there 41? Have you gotten, your bedtime reading material? Okay, so there's kind of your basic geometry, and then there's extra geometry that you want to include into a model that could be useful for construction methods or additive manufacturing. So like an arrow or an axis in your model that might indicate build direction. That's an example. We have product and process definition requirements. This has gotten us into a lot of trouble because, as you know, with additive, we're starting to blend this stuff together, and so the little siloed organizations and buckets, they get dumped out and, on the table together. So we've been trying to do our best there, but what we've tried to do is basically define some practices and some tools to tell you how to do your process if that is an important factor for your organization. DoD has a lot of these kind of requirements, so that's a driver. And then product data packages. So the technical data package requirements, we have got a first cut at what that kind of information might look like. I think from the gap analysis, this is maybe 3 to 5 of those high priority gaps. So we haven't really analyzed them on a technical level, what those look like, but at a first cut, that's kind of where we're at. And then a couple of appendices. So again, we have 12 new definitions. I've got the standard on my computer. If anybody wants to look at them, it's great. And then 20 that we reference. Just a quick couple of pictures. This is one of the gaps identified on the list to define build and gravity references. It's really not very complicated. So we just basically kind of gave you an idea of how to do it. We have some geometry characteristics that we're identifying, including how to represent a surface in 3D. If it was simple and square like this would be great, but we also have curved surface examples that it's really intended for. Bounded regions, fancy word to say volumes and stuff inside. So we have bounded surfaces and bounded regions, and how you could cut that up and slice it up and then give it profile tolerances. Lattice structures, we're not defining the actual structure geometry, we're just telling you what it might be and how you might be able to describe some infill, which I think I have some examples. Gradient control, if you have a bounded volume that has two different materials and you need to describe how those are changing in that volume, we've took a cut at that as well. Design characteristics, so here's complex geometry, right? This is really what we're talking about when we go to additive, and this is way outside the drawing practice bailiwick, so that's why this is a big need. Design characteristics, designing for assembly, part location. I know that ASTM will recognize the figure on the left. We actually replicated that and then added some notations and to help describe how that might be defined and described. Describing free zones, infill patterns. Most of this we're doing with associative notes to the surface. And some supplemental geometry. So it's fairly simple, but we've got, a team of, there's at least 50 people on this particular subcommittee that have been contributing and relaying information. So just trying to get some ideas out there that are easily consumable by both the CAD systems and by the people. So wrap it up. I got to wrap it up now. Okay. I got 2 minutes. All right, I can do it. So then the next thing here is support structures. Again, this is not topology creation. This is not, how do you organically create those support structures? This is just a, hey, see that block over there? I want some support structures about 20% full. So that's a way to describe that as it leaves the designer's hands into the manufacturer's hands. If you didn't want to build in support structures, you'd model them in. And then finally, data packages. We have broken them into a couple of different types and then described what will go into each of those types. My real job is to work with companies, and this is a big deal as well, just figuring out what goes in those, because it's all unique to typically an organization. It's typically unique to the manufacturing methods that you're using. So this also extends MIL 31000, the concepts of MIL 31000A, and is also in partnership with what's being done in the 1441.1 standard. And that's it.
Thank you all for being here. I know a lot of people think about SAE as being the automotive engineers representing the automotive industry. Our organization was actually founded in 1905. But we got into the aerospace world in 1916 and published our first aerospace standard in 1917. So we've been in the aerospace world for 100 years now. So that's kind of something a lot of people don't know about our organization. So today I just want to talk briefly about, our role in developing aerospace material specifications that are used to support aircraft certification and spacecraft certification, I should say. And then give you a little bit of an overview about our additive manufacturing committee, which was started up several years ago. So a lot of you in the audience might not be familiar with the aerospace industry and the global certification process that one has to go through, but thought it just might be helpful to give you an indication of how many SAE documents are actually referenced both by the U.S. government, both in the civilian and defense industries, as well as by the United Nations bodies that cover aviation, and the European equivalents, which is typically EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency. SAE was honored in October of 2015. We received a request from the FAA to actually form a committee, which we had already started on, to develop aerospace specifications, and that this is done with the purpose of assisting the FAA as they develop the guidance material that they need for additive manufacturing certification. So that's really, what our committee is doing, is supporting that effort. A lot of people throw the terminology AMS around, and that stands for Aerospace Material Specifications. They don't always realize that is, they are published by SAE. So, and the reason that we need to have specific aerospace material specifications is basically to lock down a lot of the material properties, so that we have the consistency when the parts are made, that they are made by the same process, using the same material. You have the repeatability, everything that's necessary in order to get to a point where you can create design allowables so that you can get a safety critical part or structure approved in order to fly. So it's very critical to have that traceability that goes back to some statistically substantiated material property. And another key thing that I didn't mention was within our SAE specs, our material specifications, we are not able to downgrade those. If there are any changes that have happened in the process or in the material itself, we would have to create a new document because we've got legacy materials out there. We do not want to be able, we don't want to be doing anything that hurts the existing supply chain. So we'll create a new document with different material properties and requirements. So the first manufacturing specification was actually published in 2002 by our AMSC committee that deals with titanium, beryllium, and refractory materials. That was revised in 2011, and actually that committee just a few weeks ago at their meeting decided to transfer that to SAE's Additive Manufacturing Committee. So we have a published standard now that's within the AMS-AM committee. We're happy about that, and we'll keep maintaining that. We formed our committee in 2015. We currently have over 250 members from over 15 countries, 6 subcommittees, 6 specs under development, 4 guidance documents, and we're just recently expanding into the polymers world. And I should also mention several others have brought to the foray that with the globalization of industry and standardization work, with SAE being in the aerospace area, that is already a global audience that we're dealing with. So we have participation from around the world, and when our standards are published, they are generally accepted as the worldwide standard. So I'll just put up here, I'll let you read, take a quick minute to take a look at our scope, but basically we're dealing with precursor materials, additive processes, the requirements, some of the post-processing activities that would take place, and the quality assurance. And we certainly want to emphasize that we're collaborating with many other standards development organizations, as well as working closely with the material property database handbooks and the regulatory authorities. So some of you may be familiar with MMPDS, which is the Metallic Material Property Database, and CMA 17, the Composite Materials Handbook. These are the old MIL 5 and MIL 17 handbooks that exist, and so we have relationships with people from those organizations are participating on our committees in addition to participating within their own organizations. And so, as I mentioned previously, one of the key things we're trying to do is ensure that we have a system in place where material specs are controlled and traceable back, and we have a nice path there to be able to do that. This slide is a little bit busy, but gives you an idea of what we're working on right now. We had selected the laser powder bed fusion process for superalloy 625. We're working on a material specification for the powder itself. We're working on a powder manufacturing processing spec, as well as a laser powder bed process spec. We also have one spec that we've only done one ballot on, which was the overall finished product specification for this material. And then a new project that was recently opened is to deal with the plasma transfer arc welding Type 64 wire. So we're working on both now a powder spec and a wire spec. The committee is working on several just internal kind of guidelines that we're working on for data submission. So in order to get our lot acceptance and spec minimum value put together, we're putting together the tables to help us identify how to do that, and working on some specific aerospace-oriented terminology. These documents won't be published as SAE standards or any documents, but they'll be for the internal use of the committee right now. I'd mentioned that we were recently getting into polymers. We had a kickoff telecon in January, and our first face-to-face meeting was held 2 weeks ago. And then just to give you an idea of some of the process basics, obviously all of you know about this, but what we find really key to the AMS process is to be sure that we have some standards that we're working on that are locking down the raw material, how it's produced, and what properties it has, and then also locking down that process so that we've identified a lot of key parameters that need to be controlled in order to produce this consistent product that then we have a microstructure we're looking for. We can do that post-processing. We'll use existing standards for hipping and heat treating, and then we'll have locked down those properties for the finished part then that we can use. So this kind of gives you an idea of the hierarchy that we're using then. So we have at the top the finished product, finished material part spec. That will call out a process specification, which also calls out the feedstock precursor material specification. And that will also then indeed call out the process specification for the feedstock itself. So we've got, how the feedstock is processed, called out in the feedstock material specification, moving on up to that overall laser powder bed fusion process that we could use this for electron beam down the road. We can keep this same hierarchy as we move into various materials and various processes. We are expanding, and this would just kind of give you an overview of the fact that right now we have some activities going on in metals. Our polymers group has just gotten kicked off with some good participation from people around the world, and we'll move into ceramics probably a few years down the road, as well as composites, although some of the discussion we've had with the polymer matrix composites is that might just take place under the polymer group because people are already using fiber. So perhaps it would just make sense to do the polymer matrix composites with the polymer group. But still we'll have metal matrix and ceramic matrix composites down the road. Our upcoming meetings we have monthly virtual meetings and have a telecon scheduled next week, I believe. And then in the fall, we're going to have our meeting in Scottsdale, Arizona. And the next spring meeting will be hosted by Norsk Titanium in Norway. So if any of you have any interest in participating in these committees, feel free to talk to me, or we have at the table after the session's over.
So the first of the next series of speakers is, let me McDaniel, SME, Vice Chair of AMSC. Our first speaker up is from ASW, Peter Portella, who is the Program Manager for Standards Development. Peter.
Hello. So I'm here and I'm going to give a pretty high-level representation as to what AWS is doing, and then go a little bit more specific into what we're doing with additive manufacturing in our D20.1 document. So this is a little history as to AWS and what we do. We are a SDO, and we only have one document right now that we're working on regarding additive manufacturing. It's our first AM document, and our goal is to provide for the dissemination of leading new technologies, in this case AM, for application to the welding industry worldwide. Since we are working with welding, our standard involves metal AM in specific, no plastic. So right now, our SDO deals with approximately 200 task groups, 20 active standing committees, and various subcommittees within that. Our expert volunteers represent end users, manufacturers, suppliers, academia, government, associations, trade groups, and consultants. Our process goes through the ANSI accreditation process. So sometimes our standards may take a little longer to get out, but they are all ANSI accredited. Well, I would say about 95% of our standards are ANSI accredited standards. We also have work going on with ISO and CC 44. The way AWS is structured involving standards is as follows. So we have to ballot things through multiple levels. We have our subcommittee levels, which typically they're the people on the ground level writing the standards. Then above that, we have our actual main committee standards, as we call them, and they're the overarching committee. In this case, D20 is a main committee. There's no subcommittee under it. It's worked by different task groups on qualification, fabrication, and inspection in this case. Above that, we have another level called the Technical Activities Committee. They oversee all actions that are dealt with regarding regarding committee work. So any document that is going to be published as an AWS document has to be balloted through TAC. This does add another level of complexity, but we find that the feedback we receive is very helpful. Now, the thing about TAC is that you have the heads of each committee within AWS. So it's, in this case, D20 is all AM experts. TAC, however, is one individual from, let's say, the structural steel committee. There'll be one individual from the high energy beam, et cetera, et cetera. So you do get, it's almost like a public review of your document. We had some questions earlier today as to how a need is established. If there's a certain need that's established for a document, an individual has to step forward and say they're willing to take on this project. Then they approach TAC with a plan. In this case, for D20, a group of individuals representing a group of individuals representing the additive manufacturing field approached TAC, said, AM is a new and exciting field. We really feel that AWS should be involved in this. This is our plan to create this standard. This led to the work on D20.1. Here we go. So right now, D20.1 has 17 active members and 13 advisors. There's 8 users, 1 consultant, 5 producers, 2 general interests, and 1 educator. D20.1 is constantly expanding. All our meetings are open to the public, and we're constantly having people come in as guests, be interested, join, some as members, some as advisors. Okay, getting into D20.1, the main clauses are procedure qualification, performance qualification, fabrication, and inspection. The way we deal with the different requirements is that we have things based off of Class A, Class B, and Class C parts. We also have a commentary. So one of the issues we came up with while D20.1 was being formed is that we felt there was only a certain level of language we could throw out within D20.1 to regulate things. So by adding a commentary, we're able to elaborate on that language and kind of ease any confusion. It'll be at the back of the book. So let's say there's a clause 4.3. There may be a commentary clause 4.3, which is much longer and explains not just the intent as to what we were getting at while we wrote this, but also any possible confusions that we thought might come up. Right now, D20.1 has been balloted to the D20 main committee, and we received approximately 190 comments, I believe, the first time, which isn't too bad. We've worked through most of those. We have another conference call at the end of May where we hope to finish going through those comments, and then we can reballot to the D20 main committee. After that, it'll have to be balloted to TAC. We'll have to resolve any comments that TAC put forth, and we're hoping to publish D20.1 early 2018. In terms of recruitment, again, we're always recruiting individuals that may be interested in working with us. Right now, we specifically need educators, consultants, and general interest members. That's not to say that if you do not fit into that, you're not welcome, but we have found it difficult to find experts that are specifically educators, are very, very difficult to find, at least that have come to us. We have approximately 2 to 3 in-person meetings per year and 3 to 5 teleconferences per year. This is just some general information on AWS standard sales. Everything is available on our website. And that's all I have.
Quick calibration for the audio content. How many of you are working with physicians in hospitals or are physicians in hospitals? All right. How many have heard of the word DICOM before? All right. Okay, we're doing a little better. All right. So now I know which acronyms to explain. All right. Okay. Here's the situation. Basically, we had increasing use of medical-oriented additive manufacturing, driven from patient-specific 3D images. So if you go for a CT, a computed tomography image, or an MRI, and in some cases ultrasound, these create 3D volumetric representations of you as the patient. There's a number of situations where extracting this information, converting it to a 3D model, and printing it is very useful. Sometimes it's even creating objects that you would mount on top of the patient during surgery as a guide. And in some cases, they're actually creating implants, either permanent or bioabsorbable implants. Very exciting stuff, moving really fast. Standards are needed. One of the areas that I'm going to talk about is not the standards that we talked about at the beginning of the roadmap, because there are many people dealing with things related to FDA regulations of medical devices as they talk about implants and things like that. I'm going to focus entirely on the electronic data management standards. That's what MITA is about. It's the Medical Imaging Technology Alliance. It's a SDO that's comprised of volunteers from industry and the healthcare community, and run as a very lean operation with very few permanent staff members. The problem created, why we need these standards, is because HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, if I remember it correctly, it's one of those acronyms you don't actually spell it very often if you're medicine because you've been using it for years. But basically, that's the thing that protects your privacy as a patient. There's a lot of regulation around it. And you really have to, if you work in healthcare, pay a lot of attention. There's lots of really horrible financial penalties, and plus, you just don't want to violate a patient's trust by giving out their medical information inadvertently. There's also what more concerning is what they call wrong patient errors. That's where you actually use medical information for one patient to make a treatment decision for a different patient, simply because you're dealing with so many patients every day, and there's a chance of a mix-up. That's why we label everything. That creates HIPAA problems because we label everything. So it's a bit of a yin-yang. All right. It's very hard after you've created these 3D objects to sometimes compare them back to the original source patient data. You did a CT scan 3 weeks ago, you've created this model after a log-involved process, and you want to see how it aligns with the patient's anatomy, or if that's rather challenging. That's what we call a registration problem in medicine, probably a few of your fields as well. So the challenge is, we got file formats. The DICOM standard created by MITA, which I'll talk about in a minute, is both a file format and a network protocol at the same time, but we're going to focus primarily on the file format side right now. As you guys know, if you're involved in additive manufacturing, we got lots of standards. We love standards. We have lots of file formats. Everybody has their favorite. They use them in different situations. And some of it's driven by what the manufacturer likes of the system you're using, and sometimes it's the software you're using to manipulate it. And in any given task, you may find that you're using 2 or 3 of these formats in sequence to get where you want to go. This is not likely to change soon, although hope springs eternal. Meanwhile, medical imaging has long standardized on the DICOM standard for interchange of medical imaging data. We used to live back in 1992 in an era of proprietary formats and people trying to hack things like TIFF to handle medical information, which it wasn't well suited for. So we actually got together and said, this is stupid, let's create a standards body, and under the National Electronic Manufacturers Association, they created MITA subgroup, and we came up with DICOM. And I remember sitting at medical meetings in 1992, handing out pamphlets and saying, here, let me tell you why you want to ask your vendor for DICOM. So we're well past that. Medicine is an ever-evolving science, and we continue to create new subsections of the standard to deal with new kinds of data. So the SME, our sponsors, basically said, hey, we have this medical group, and they keep telling us we have a file format problem. Let's go figure out which SDO is responsible for medical imaging file formats. Guess what? That's MITA. And so that special interest group came to MITA, and they said, hey, we want you to send us a representative who knows about additive manufacturing. And we basically will form a working group, and you liaise with them. And when they asked who in the room knows about additive manufacturing, I looked around, I was the only one with my hand raised, so here I am. All right, so what's our mandate? So working group 17, by the way, 17, we have way more than 17 working groups, except we're reusing the working group that had finished its work on 3D volumetric representations of medical data. For kind of creating surface models and things like that, and we're just we're giving them a new mandate. So their mandate is to figure out a way to store, query, and retrieve 3D models themselves as DICOM objects. This is our first work item. We can do as many work items as the community wants to do, and we expect to do more. In addition to being able to store and manage the data of these existing systems, and I'll explain what those acronyms are for you non-medical folks in a minute, but basically you want to preserve the links to the source image. So you can actually go back to this model was created from these images. In some cases, these two sets of images that were fused together and then used to create the model. Sometimes MRI and CT would be combined, for example, because they visualize different parts of your anatomy better. Anyway, so what will happen is they will be able to create these objects, tie them to the original thing, store them in what they call the picture archiving communication system, or the new kid on the block, the vendor-neutral archive. These are just medical image management systems. If you watch Grey's Anatomy and the doctor's standing around looking at a screen and spinning a CT around, that's a PACS. And there's maybe a VNA behind it as well. But basically, it's a system that manages these images, and in the PACS case also visualizes them for medical interpretation. Like I said, we'll address other work items as they come, but right now, this is our main item. We're going to solve this problem, and that's where we're devoting 100% of our resources. So because I'm a software engineer and I know a little bit about manufacturing, a lot about image file formats, I need help. So Justin over here, my co-chair, he actually works with additive manufacturing at a hospital, Phoenix Children's Hospital. And so he can represent kind of the healthcare user community very well. And meanwhile, I'm over on the industry side. I used to work at a company called McKesson. I still work kind of at a company named McKesson, except they spun it out and merged it with another company. So I work for kind of a subdivision called Change Healthcare now. And it confuses lots of people because there's two really giant companies you've never heard of, but they're big. All right, item 1, do not create another file format. We have too many. All right, I think we can all agree on that. So also, all your stuff kind of understands most of these file formats, so we don't want to break that. You know, we don't want to go to all the vendors, and you have to read this file format on top of the ones you already have to deal. So we are going to do something called encapsulation. We are going to, and we've done this before, we did this with PDF a while back, because there's a lot of medical equipment creating very fancy multimedia reports. And then we saw no reason to reinvent the PDF format inside DICOM, so we wrapped it. Basically, there's a way to take the PDF format, stick it in what's called a DICOM object, add the benefits of the DICOM header, which keep track of things like which patient is this, when was this image acquired, who was the medical care operator who created it, you know, things like that. Even things for managing patient privacy and many, many, many other things that has done in the last 20 years of accretive standards building. All right. So we all work on what's called an information object definition. That is basically the package. It ends up being a file format if you save it to a disk, but it's also the thing that's flying around the network when our systems are intercommunicating, handshaking, and agreeing what data to exchange. The nice thing about it is we can use capabilities within the standard that already exists to solve the problem of tying the images back to the source image, including what's called a frame of reference. For you guys, that's basically spatial coordinate systems. Basically, when you arrange something for printing on a machine on the bed, you may find that you actually completely recoordinate the coordinate system. But in medicine, you want to go back to the patient's coordinate system, and we have that. And then we have a way to map them, and it handles translations, rotations, everything. So we can just leverage that. And so the nice thing is that medical professionals should be able to actually even superimpose their 3D models on top of their original CT scans after we do this, and people write a bit of software. All right, so where are we? we have approved work item 1 as a concept. So we haven't written it yet. We wrote a scope document that got approved with some minor modifications. By the way, I will mention that they called the working group 3D manufacturing, not 3D printing. So if someone wants to do a CNC feedback and get that into the standard, we're happy with part of our scope. We're now drafting the actual detailed proposal for this new object that we'll create within the standard. It's actually a document and will be added as a new section within the standards as it exists. However, we're faced with some key questions. It became apparent that if we just try and encapsulate every kind of file format, we'll actually create more problems than we solve, and it will be a lot of work for us. And we're always in favor of doing less work, since we're all volunteers. So what's the smallest set of file formats we can get away with supporting? And which file formats are more in demand for different uses? We kicked around. On our first call, by the way, we broke MITA's teleconference system. We had over 100 people on the call. So we have decided to leverage that. We are doing the survey. There's the tiny URL, .com3dp, is the survey in progress till the 16th. There's a partial data set. No surprise, STL is very popular. We will be including STL. The other questions, these are all other formats that are not encumbered by a license. That is one of the only requirements, is that any format has to be open. OBJ, we have an open question about that because of some ownership issues that happened, and Justin's going to figure that out for me. So it may or may not be on the list. If you want to know more about the working group and volunteer, you can contact either my co-chair or myself or our assistant from MITA. She's the secretary who kind of keeps us all organized and following process. That's Cheryl. And thank you.
And I'm not really supposed to tell you what that means either. It used to mean the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, but over time we've changed that, and the M and the I now stand for Healthcare Technology, so we just go by AMI. AMI is not in additive manufacturing. We are a standards developer and have been for 10 years now in the area of medical technology. There we go, sorry. And we were founded 50 years ago this year. And I put this statement up because I think it's important. It says the association will provide the safety and performance of medical instruments to education and standards development in order to increase market acceptance of these devices. There are three aspects here that we'll come back to later: safety, performance, the efficacy of a device, and increase market acceptance, increase access to those devices. AMI works not just on our own. We work with several organizations. Of course, ANSI. We are accredited by ANSI to develop American national standards, but our program is really very much an international program. We work with ISO and IEC to develop a body of standards. Domestically, we have about 150 or 170 committees right now, and we've developed over 280 U.S. standards that are used. However, we also run 15 ISO or IEC committees, and by run them, I mean we run the international secretariats. Not sure. Hope that's not me. We run the international secretariats for those committees, developing standards globally, because the medical device industry is global, and we need standards that are global. It's a regulated industry. A medical device manufacturer is never going to get to market, or almost never, without going through a regulator. And those regulators are not just the FDA, but also in China, in Japan, in Australia, and with the new medical device regulations in Europe, they're in Europe as well. So there are right now an estimated 1,500 standards that we've worked with that are connected to regulations either in the U.S. or in Europe that medical device and medical technology manufacturers are going to have to meet. Our program of work is pretty huge, and this is just a quick selection of some of the subjects that we work with. Additive manufacturing is not in there because additive manufacturing is something that we're just now really beginning to address. But these standards all do apply to your devices, even if they are additively created through AM. Getting back to the key principles of medical device standards. The idea behind medical device standards is to create better patient outcomes. There are three elements that can create better patient outcomes. Safety. Devices have to be safe. If devices are not safe, you're going to harm patients. Performance and efficacy. If devices don't do what they're supposed to, you're not going to create better patient outcomes. And access. People have to be able to get these devices and use them in order for them to be effective. You can make a very safe and effective device that is so expensive that nobody's ever going to be able to use it. You can create one is very efficacious, but kills too many patients. The key thing is to balance these three principles, and that's what we've tried to do at AMI. As we move forward, we want to make sure that as we try and gain some of the benefits from additive manufacturing in access, being able to get devices to patients, and performance and efficacy, that we don't in some way compromise safety and vice versa. Going back to the list of our standards, and the one yellow one has no meaning here in particular, it just is. You'll notice that at the bottom of them, we have a lot of particular standards for devices. So that if your additively manufactured device is in fact an implant, you're going to have to meet implant standards. But the industry has gone away from trying to write specific standards for devices and writing standards that try to ensure that safety and efficacy are engineered at the very beginning, especially safety. Because one of the things we saw is that engineering, when creating devices, often focus on the performance of the device, making sure they can create the device and that it performs, and they forget safety until the last part, and that you can't do that. You have to start beginning to think about safety and how the device is going to be used or reused very early on in the process. So we have standards for quality systems, risk management, device design and design controls, sterilization, biocompatibility that you're going to have to meet if you're doing additive manufacturing. Sometimes you're going to look at those and say, how do I meet those? It's very hard to see. If you pick a particular sterilization standard and think about additive manufacturing, there are complexities that really make it hard to understand. But most of these standards really do work for additive manufacturing. What we want to find out is where the gaps are, where we need to provide more guidance, and maybe where we do need to provide some special standards for your processes that still achieve the safety, efficacy, and access criteria that we seek, but don't in any way hinder the development of your devices. We always try to avoid device design criteria. We always try to avoid anything that's going to be a roadblock. So that's really all we have. I have to say, and I'm going to give some of the time back, I think.
Good afternoon. So what I've found since participating in the AMSC project, representing the Brenda Working Group, is that what we actually do and standardize really confuses people. So anyway, I will take an attempt to tell you simply the part that we standardize, which is primarily getting information from here to there, and when it arrives, having some information along with it as to what you would like to have happen to it. So we are, to some degree, would fit in with what you heard from Maida, in that they are looking at the file formats that additive manufacturing equipment can consume. So if you would have it stored somewhere within a medical environment, and you want to move it to one of those machines and then send instructions, this is what you should do with this file. That's what we standardize. So we are a member program within the Industry Standard and Technology Organization. It's one of the elements of the IEEE. Separately from the rest of IEEE, it's a unique standalone organization, and it's primarily, if you're a standards body and you're looking for someone that can help you get your tax kind of stuff and sign up with the IRS correctly, and administrative assistance, and a number of things that standards bodies need, you can join up and you get these services by being part of ISTO. We were originally affiliated with the IETF, the people that write RFCs that run the internet as we know it. and we transitioned over to working with ISTO instead about 10 to 15 years ago. And they've been a very nice organization to work with. Some of the things that we did in terms of our IETF days, which exist to this day in the 2D space, ways of querying document printers about things, capabilities they have, things that they're doing, how is your job going, etc. And we're, as part of coming over from IETF and being part of ISTO, we're a completely open standards development process. You don't need to be a member in order to participate. We'll take information from anyone, have anyone help us. There are no sort of fees or any kind of specific thing you need to do to sign up and help. And so our 3D printing work, where it came from is, as many standards bodies are, you have members. And we have quite a number that manufacture primarily in their earlier days document printers. And they moved into the 3D realm. So they have different divisions that create equipment that is additive manufacturing based. And the idea was, if you look at things from people who work with manufacturing and manufacturing execution systems, so the IT elements of manufacturing, they think of production lines and specific elements in a production line, tooling, very focused, and you have to QA that, then you have to certify that, you lock the whole production line down, and now it will make something reliably to very huge volumes. For additive manufacturing devices, they're a little bit more along the line of a document printer because every file you send is effectively unique. So there isn't tooling, there isn't this QA lockdown thing, and so the model that we did for 2D devices turned out to be relevant for additive manufacturing because of this, because each file is somewhat a unique digital representation of something you would like the device to build. And we look at the devices in their totality. So what I find interesting in all the people I'm meeting who are process aware, if you go out onto the show floor here at RAPID and you look at one of the bigger metal machines that's like size of a refrigerator, if you were to talk to them, what do you see? I don't even think they see the skin. They know inside it's all these different elements working together. There are powders and a laser melting, stuff is happening. And if you ask me, from my status perspective, what do I see? It's a refrigerator. I see the whole thing because I'm going to talk to it and ask it a certain standardized questions that are part of what we have published to date. And how you do it inside? Great. I don't want to know. That is, the standard would never work if I needed to know, because all the different organizations that have great creative ideas and are bringing all these different amazing products to market, we probably don't call what they do the same. And asking them to come up with a term they would agree on is probably not really going to happen. So instead, there are certain conditions where having a standard where you can map whatever you did and whatever you called it into a standard set of terms will help you out. So that's what we have done in the past and have done with our 3D effort. And since we are responsible for an actual network protocol that transfers data from A to B, we realize not everyone wants it, but if the semantics that travel with it that assist in telling the receiving device what you'd like it to do are useful, it would be nice if you made those standalone outside of the protocol. So we've done that as well. So you can get from us a schema if you just want to see what's the model look like, what are the terms, and you might want to use them in some different way. Or if you go with loading a internet printing protocol client into your device, everything's bundled when you load the software. So the first thing we did was you look at who would ever want to use this and why, and that comes down to cost usually, which is when you get to a certain tipping point of devices you've made, the size of the suite of the products that you make, and the places from which you can launch the digital information you're going to process, gets to a point where you've got user clients across mobile, in the cloud, desktops, multiple versions, multiple operating systems. And wow, you have QA engineers and you have infrastructure and you have serious cost, which for the 2D type of company goes into the millions of dollars per year with all the different platforms they have to have, device drivers they have to keep current, QA testing they have to do, regression stuff, validation that new equipment runs across all kinds of different environments that they have on their website that they support. And so when you reach somewhere in there of cost, all of a sudden going the standard route where you conform to a standard, and then you're now compatible with clients that use that standard across all the different platforms that you don't have to write the software, and you can thin down the amount of things you test. So what we found in terms of organizations and people in industry that wanted to participate in our initial effort, it was the desktop FDM type of manufacturers in the additive space. They had enough machines and they have enough issues with support across desktops and mobile and stuff that moving towards the standard made sense. The more expensive machines, say in the metal powder area, haven't really hit the tipping point yet. They can still do okay writing their own apps, so they haven't shown as much interest in what we're doing yet. And you can see the protocol, what it does, that it controls who can gain access, be allowed to send something, secure the transport if you'd like, and then also provides the information about what you'd like done when it gets there. But as you notice, it's what you want to do. It's not how the machine receiving the information is going to actually do it. And then you can ask how they go, so that for certain things that get processed where you have to validate was the heat the machine generated during the whole life of the processing within a certain range, you can pull that back in the receipt. In terms of being a standards body, if you're going to dare put your toe in the water about that whole file format thing, you do have to choose ones that conform with the process rules that you run from in terms of the standards body. So the ones you see here that we've been able to put into our initial standard saying that you should support them, it's ones that fit with our model. AMF is not a bad format by any means, but in order for us to review it and then do up the job ticketing examples of how you use our standard along with an AMF file, we first have to negotiate an agreement with ISO for our liaison, which we're working on, but it's not done yet. So until it is, we can't actually access the information about the AMF file format. So that can be a future thing, but not available today. And then the protocol doesn't prevent any particular information from being encapsulated. It doesn't hurt it. It's an encapsulation, as you heard about before. So the file format stays exactly as it was from end to end. You can put anything you'd like in there, and even G-code, except that if you redo that, because G-code can tell a particular machine exact things it could do, you could, if you're not careful, end up conflicting with instructions you put in the job ticketing wrapper that was IPP based. So if you're going to do one of the machine instruction formats, you just have to be a little careful. And because we've just become part of the core group of standards of IETF. The original IPP was done right around the year 2000, and for some reason or other, we aged long enough that we were allowed to come back to the IETF and get on the standards track. So now we've had 2 new RFCs published this year that were part of the core of how the internet runs. And because of that, you get all this great stuff about your authorizations and your security and fitting in with the modern IT environment, which is the side we work on. We're all of a computing IT side of standardization. And as we've talked about, printers are different, so we don't get involved with trying to tell them how to do what they do and stay higher level, which allows for standardization of terms and of what you're asking for. So it's an intent capability in the job ticketing. You, the creator of the file, sending it to one of these devices to process, are putting forward what you would like to see happen. And the device will then get back to you, whether it can A, do that, so it accepts your request and will begin processing the file, and then B, when it's done, what did it do? And then that's what the receipts are for. And this is how, for anyone who'd like to, we're happy to have you help us, and this is how it works. So thank you very much.
First of all, thank you for everyone who stayed with us. All of the SDOs have tables just outside here They will be there at least for the next hour to answer questions, to get you enrolled in their programs, and help to move all the standards forward. We will be taking all of the presentations, creating PDFs, and posting them on the website. We have scan badges, and we will send you an email when those are available on the forum website so you can download them. On behalf of everyone, the more than 200 volunteers involved in the AMSC and creating the technology roadmap, want to thank you for being here and encourage you to get involved. Thank you.